I was 14 days into a hitch on the Deepwater Resolute, 130 miles off the Louisiana coast, lying in a bunk that smelled like diesel and industrial soap, staring at my phone like it owed me something. It was 11 on a Wednesday night. Madison hadn't answered my last 3 FaceTime calls. Now, you need to understand, my wife answered by 10, always. It was the rhythm we had. I'd call around 9:30. She'd pick up. I'd see Lily in her pajamas, waving some crayon drawing at the camera. And for a few minutes, the Gulf didn't feel like it was swallowing me whole. Then Lily would go to bed, and Madison and I would talk for a little while, the kind of talk married people have when they're tired and far apart. Not deep. Just enough to say I'm still here. But that Wednesday, nothing. 3 calls, 3 rings into voicemail. I told myself she fell asleep. Lily had been going through a phase where she wouldn't stay down, and Madison had been saying she was wiped by 8 o'clock. Made sense. Reasonable explanation. I almost believed it. Then I opened the Ring app. I didn't do it out of suspicion. I want to be clear about that because later, when everything blew open, people tried to make it sound like I'd been spying on my wife from an oil rig, like some kind of paranoid lunatic. That's not what it was. I put that doorbell camera up the week after Lily came home because I liked watching her play in the yard when I was offshore. She'd chase the neighbor's cat around the azaleas and fall on her backside in the grass, and I'd replay it 3-4 times in my bunk, and it made the distance bearable. So I opened the app, and I saw a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. Dark sedan. The timestamp said 9:14 p.m. I swiped to the live feed. Still there. I took a screenshot, put the phone face down on my chest, stared at the ceiling for a while. I didn't call again. I didn't send a text full of question marks. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., and I lay there in the dark listening to the rig groan beneath me and the Gulf slap against the legs of the platform, and I did not sleep. Some guys would have called back 40 times, would have worked themselves into a froth, said something stupid, set something on fire they couldn't unburn. I've seen it on the rig, men who get bad news from home and come apart at the seams. I watched a roughneck named Tully put his fist through a locker door after his girlfriend sent him a text that was meant for someone else. Broke 3 knuckles, couldn't work for 6 weeks, lost the girlfriend anyway. I am not Tully. I'm a pipeline welder. I measure twice. I cut once, and when the ground shifts under me, I don't jump. I check the foundation, but God, I wanted to jump. Let me back up, because you can't understand what that car in the driveway meant unless you understand what it took to build that driveway, that house, that life. I met Madison Porter at a backyard barbecue in Gastonia in the summer of 2015. She was wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at something my buddy's wife said. And when she turned and looked at me, I felt like somebody had taken a pipe wrench to my sternum. I'm not a man who falls easy. 4 years in the Army as a combat engineer will grind the romance out of you pretty efficiently. But Madison, she had this warmth that came off her like heat from a weld. You felt it before you got close. We married in 2016. Small ceremony, her parents' backyard. I wore a suit that didn't fit right, and she told me I looked like a federal agent, and I told her she looked like trouble. And that was about the last smooth thing either of us ever said to each other. We were simple people. We worked. We ate dinner together. We talked about having kids the way people talk about the weather, easily, naturally, like it was just going to happen. It didn't happen. 6 years we tried. 3 rounds of IUI, which if you don't know, is the one where they skip the middleman but keep the lab coats. Then IVF, 1 round, the kind where you mortgage a piece of your future on a maybe. Madison gave herself shots in the stomach every morning for weeks. I watched her do it, watched her hands shake, watched her breathe through it, watched her pretend it didn't hurt because she wanted a baby more than she wanted comfort. It didn't take. We didn't talk about it for a while after that, almost 2 years. We just lived, went to work, came home, ate dinner in a kitchen that had a nursery's worth of silence on the other side of the wall. I think we both needed to grieve the version of our lives we'd planned before we could imagine a different one. Madison went back to therapy for a stretch. I took extra hitches offshore. We weren't falling apart. We were just sitting still, waiting until we could stand up again. It was early 2024 when Madison brought it up. We were on the back porch, not talking about anything in particular, and she said, "I've been reading about adoption through the county." Said it the way you test a bruise, carefully, ready to pull back. I looked at her, and I could see she'd been carrying the idea for weeks, afraid to say it out loud in case I shot it down or in case saying it made the wanting worse. I said, "Then we find out what it takes." That was 2024. We started the process through Mecklenburg County DSS that fall. And if you think the fertility treatments were grueling, let me tell you about a government home study. 4 months of background checks, FBI, SBI, local law enforcement, medical exams, financial disclosures down to the penny, autobiographical statements where you have to explain your entire childhood, your marriage, your reasons for wanting a child, your discipline philosophy, your support network, your mental health history, separate interviews, joint interviews. I've had security clearances that were less invasive. But I did every bit of it. I didn't complain. I converted the guest room into a child's bedroom, painted it soft yellow because the agency pamphlet said warm, neutral tones help with transitions, built a bookshelf by hand from poplar I milled myself, bought a stuffed elephant from a shop in Noda because another pamphlet said transitional objects help kids feel safe. I was ready. I was so ready it scared me a little. Our assigned social worker was a guy named Alex Pruitt, 29, licensed clinical social worker, looked like he'd walked out of a catalog for a company that sells therapy and good intentions. Clean cut. Soft voice. The kind of handshake that's warm but not too firm. Practiced, I realize now, like everything else about him. He came to the house for the home study, walked through every room, asked about the paint color, asked about the bookshelf, asked about the elephant. He noticed things, commented on them, made you feel like he was paying attention in a way that other people didn't. Madison told me after his first visit, he really gets it. He actually listens. I said, "Good, that's what we need." I meant it. I was offshore half the time. I was grateful that someone was guiding my wife through the emotional gauntlet of bringing a child into our home. I thought he was doing his job. I thought he was one of the good ones. During one of the interviews, he asked me about my military service. Standard question, it's on the forms. I told him about my 4 years as a combat engineer, my honorable discharge, my DD-214, my VA file, all clean. No disciplinary actions, no psychological flags, nothing but 4 years of service and a quiet exit. He nodded, made notes in his folder, said, "Thank you for your service." Everybody says that. It never means anything. But later, I found out exactly what his note said, and thank you wasn't the theme. They brought Lily to us on a Tuesday in April of 2025. The match meeting was at the DSS office, fluorescent lights, government carpet, a conference room that smelled like coffee and copy toner. Madison and I sat on one side of a low table. A foster care coordinator sat on the other, and then the door opened, and a woman I'd never met walked in holding the hand of a 4-year-old girl who was clutching a coloring book like it was the only thing in the world that belonged to her. She was small, smaller than 4 should be, Dark hair cut uneven, someone had tried, but not someone who knew what they were doing. She didn't look at us. She looked at the floor, then at the table, then at the coloring book. She didn't speak. The foster mother, a tired, kind woman named Gail, said Lily had been quiet for weeks, since the court hearing that terminated her biological mother's rights, substance abuse. The details were in the file, and I'm not going to go through them here. It's Lily's story, not mine, and she'll tell it when she's ready, if she ever wants to. Madison tried first, got down on her knees, used her best warm voice, the one she uses with anxious patients at the dental office. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm Madison. We're so happy to meet you." Lily pulled the coloring book tighter against her chest and didn't look up. 20 minutes passed like that, Madison talking gently. Lily somewhere far away inside herself. The coordinator made encouraging noises. Gail watched with the expression of a woman who'd seen this before and knew you couldn't force it. I was sitting in a chair off to the side because I didn't want to crowd her. But after those 20 minutes, I slid down onto the floor, just sat on the carpet, cross-legged, about 5 feet from her, and I picked up a crayon from the cup on the table and started drawing on a piece of construction paper. I drew a butterfly. Badly. I'm a welder, not an artist. The wings were lopsided. The body looked like a caterpillar that had given up halfway through. Lily glanced at it, glanced away, glanced back. I drew another one, worse than the first. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, more like air escaping through a crack in something that had been sealed shut, but it was close. And she looked at me, straight at me for the first time. Gail said quietly, "That's the first time she's laughed in 3 weeks." The transition took a month, 3 supervised visits at the DSS office, then 2 overnight stays at our house, then full placement in May. I timed my rotation so I'd be home for the first 2 weeks. Told my supervisor it was non-negotiable. He understood. He had kids. Those first nights were hard. Lily had nightmares, the kind where a child sits up in bed and screams without opening her eyes, and you don't know if she's awake or asleep or somewhere in between that no adult can reach. Madison would jolt up at the sound, and I'd say, "I got it," and I'd go in there and sit on the floor next to Lily's bed with my back against the wall, and I'd read Goodnight Moon until she settled. Sometimes twice, sometimes 4 times. It didn't matter. I'd have read it 40. She started calling me Daddy on day 9. She didn't call Madison Mommy until day 16. And look, I know the books explain this. Kids coming from trauma backgrounds often attached to the calmer presence, the more predictable one. It's not a competition. It's neuroscience. But I could see it land on Madison like a stone dropping into still water. She'd be standing in the doorway, watching me read to Lily, and something would move across her face. Not quite jealousy, not quite resentment, but something in that neighborhood. Displacement, maybe. Like she'd imagined motherhood as a door she would open, and instead it was a door Lily opened, and Lily chose to walk through it toward me. I should have talked to her about it. I know that now. I should have said, "She'll get there. Give it time. She needs us both." But I'm not built for that kind of conversation. I show up. I build things. I sit on the floor and draw bad butterflies. The talking part, the naming of feelings, the emotional maintenance, that was always the gap in my wiring. And Madison had been filling it for years, and I didn't realize how tired she was of filling it until someone else offered to. One thing I noticed during the supervised visits, before Lily came home. Alex was there for everyone, standard procedure. The assigned social worker observes the interactions, takes notes. But during the 3rd visit, I caught something. Lily was on the floor with me, coloring, and Madison was sitting in a chair near the window, and Alex was supposed to be watching Lily. He was watching Madison, not in an obvious way, not in a way I could point to and say, there, that, right there. It was a glance that lasted one beat too long, a shift in his attention. The way you notice a pipe fitting that's a quarter turn off spec. It looks fine if you're not paying attention, but if your eye is trained, something registers. I filed it away, the way I file away anything that doesn't have an immediate explanation. I put it in the back of my brain, behind the stack of things that needed doing, and I forgot about it. I shouldn't have. June 2025. First hitch back on the rig after Lily's placement. 14 days on, 14 off, that's the deal. You fly out to the platform on a helicopter that sounds like God shaking a tin can, and for 2 weeks your world is steel and seawater and welding arcs and the bone-deep hum of machinery that never stops. Then you fly home and try to remember how to be a husband and a father in a house that doesn't vibrate. I FaceTimed every night. Madison seemed fine, tired, which was expected. She was adjusting to having a 4-year-old full-time while working 3 days a week at the dental practice. Lily would grab the phone and show me her drawings. More butterflies. She was getting better at them. I told her so every time. About a week in, I asked Madison how the post-placement visits were going. Standard question. After the court finalizes an adoption, there's a period, 6 months to a year in North Carolina, where the social worker makes regular home visits, writes reports, confirms the placement is going well. It's the last gate before the adoption is truly, legally permanent. Madison said Alex had come by Tuesday and Thursday and was coming again Monday. I said, 3 times in 1 week? She said, he's just being thorough. He wants to make sure the transition is going smoothly. I said, okay. That night, after we hung up, I sat in the galley with a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Eisenhower administration, and I pulled up North Carolina's post-placement visit guidelines on the rig's Wi-Fi, which is about 1 step above sending a telegram. The standard is 1 visit per month. Maybe 2 in the early weeks if there are specific concerns. 3 in 1 week was not standard, 3 in 1 week was not thorough, 3 in 1 week was something else, and I could feel the shape of it forming in the dark part of my mind where I'd filed that look Alex gave my wife, and I didn't like what I was seeing. I found Derek Holt the next morning. Derek was the rig's safety supervisor, big, blunt, built like a fire hydrant, divorced twice, loyal to a fault. We'd worked together for 4 years. He was the only person on that platform I trusted with anything real. We were standing in the galley, both of us holding coffee, and I said, "Let me ask you something. Is it weird that the social worker comes to the house 3 times in 1 week?" Derek looked at me over his mug. He'd been through a custody fight himself. His first wife took their son to Pensacola, and it took Derek 2 years and most of his savings to get shared custody. He said, "Define weird." Post-placement visits, adoption social worker, 3 times in 7 days. Derek set his mug down. "Brother, nothing about family court is normal. The whole system runs on whatever the caseworker had for breakfast that morning, but 3 visits in a week?" He shook his head. "That's a lot of FaceTime for a case that's going fine." I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Derek knew me well enough to read the silence. That night, I started a note on my phone, just dates and times. When Alex visited, how long he stayed, when he left. I pulled what I could from the Ring app and from what Madison told me. I didn't tell her I was tracking it. I wasn't sure yet what I was tracking. I just knew that something was off. The way you know a weld is off before the X-ray confirms it. You feel it in your hands. My next 2 weeks home, late June into early July, I did something I almost never do. I went to a group meeting. Madison had signed us up for an adoptive parent support group at our church. one of those elevation campuses in Charlotte. She'd been going while I was offshore. I'd skipped the first 2 rounds because I'm not a group meeting kind of person. I'd rather eat a bag of roofing nails than sit in a circle and share my feelings with strangers. But I had a reason. 6 couples in the group, all at different stages. Some just starting the process, some years in. Nice people, tired people, the kind of people who chose the hard road because they believed in something. After the introductions and the sharing and the nodding, I waited for a lull and said, as casually as I could manage, "Quick question for the group. How often do your social workers come by for post-placement visits?" Every couple said the same thing, once a month. One couple, Tamara and Will, they'd finalized the year before, said their social worker rescheduled once and they didn't see her for 6 weeks. I nodded, said thanks, kept my face flat. After the meeting, while Madison was in the restroom and people were milling around the coffee table, a guy named Ryan pulled me aside. He was maybe 40, quiet, the kind of man who observes more than he speaks, which I respected. He said, low, "Your social worker is Alex Pruitt, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We had him originally before they switched us to someone else." I waited. Ryan glanced toward the hallway where his wife was chatting with another couple. Then he looked back at me and said, "We were about 4 months into our placement. Alex was coming around more than we expected. My wife mentioned it to me. I mentioned it to our agency coordinator, and 2 weeks later we had a new social worker. No explanation, just, we've made a staffing change. I asked why, and they said it was a caseload rebalancing." He paused. "It wasn't a caseload rebalancing." "What was it?" "I don't know exactly, but our new social worker let something slip once, said Alex had been transferred to Mecklenburg from Wake County under similar circumstances. So, whatever pattern you might be noticing, it didn't start here. And the fact that they moved him off our case without telling us why means somebody inside DSS noticed something again and chose the quiet fix. Again, he walked away before I could ask anything else. His wife was calling him. The moment closed. I stood there in that church hallway with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand and felt the floor tilt under me. Not from anger, not yet. From the realization that the shape forming in the dark wasn't just my imagination. It had edges. It had a history. July. Back on the rig. 14 days of steel and salt and a slow, methodical disassembly of my marriage from 130 miles away. I went through the ring footage like it was a job, because it was. I'm an engineer. I don't do feelings-based analysis. I do data. I built a spreadsheet on my phone, date, arrival time, departure time, duration. The pattern came together inside a week. Alex's car, that same dark sedan I'd first seen the night Madison didn't answer, arrived between 7:30 and 8 p.m. Always on days I was offshore. He'd leave between 10:30 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. He came 2, sometimes 3 times per week during my rotations. During my home weeks, 0 visits, not 1. You don't have to be an engineer to see what that means, but being 1 helped me keep my hands steady while I cataloged it. On one clip, Alex walked up the front path carrying a bottle of wine, not a file folder, not a clipboard, a bottle of wine. On another clip, Madison opened the door, and the way she greeted him, she stepped into him, her hand on his arm, her body language loose and familiar. It was the way she used to greet me. I closed the app, set the phone down, pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until I saw stars. I'm not going to tell you what that moment felt like because you already know. If you've been there, you know. If you haven't, no description I give you is going to be adequate. I'll just say this. I sat on that bunk in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, surrounded by 10,000 tons of steel and 100 men who depended on my hands being steady, and I felt like someone had opened a trap door in the center of my chest. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that saved me and Lily and everything that came after. I called a buddy, a guy named Travis, served with me in the engineers, now working as an investigator for a law firm in Fayetteville. I told him what I had. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "Don't confront her." "I know. Don't confront him. I know." "And Sean, for the love of God, do not do anything that can be characterized as surveillance of a state employee. You took Ring doorbell footage from your own property. That's fine. But from this moment on, you do nothing without a lawyer." "I know." "Do you? Because you sound like a man who's about to do something stupid. I sound like a man who's about to do something very, very smart. Because here's what kept me from driving to Charlotte and putting Alex Pruitt through my front door. The adoption wasn't finalized. Lily was placed with us. She lived in our house. She called me Daddy. But until a judge signed that decree, she was technically still a ward of the state whose employee was sleeping with my wife. If I blew this up, if I confronted Madison and she panicked, if Alex decided to protect himself by flagging concerns in our file, instability in the home, volatile father, whatever language he wanted to use, DSS could pull Lily, just like that, back into the system, back into the machine that had already failed her once. I was trapped, and the walls of the trap were made from the thing I loved most. So I did what I always do. I measured twice, and I started planning my cut. Pamela Archer's office was in a converted Victorian house in Dilworth, on a street lined with crepe myrtles and the kind of tasteful gentrification that Charlotte does better than any city in the South. I drove there on a Tuesday morning in early August, my first week home, while Madison was at work and Lily was at preschool. I paid the consultation fee in cash, not because I was hiding, obviously, but because Pamela required it. She'd been doing family law for 25 years, most of it involving DSS cases, and she had rules. Cash for the first meeting. No names on the receptionist's log, no digital trail until you're a formal client. She was mid-50s, trim, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of woman who could gut you with a sentence and make it sound like she was doing you a favor. She'd been a guardian ad litem before going into private practice, which meant she'd spent years advocating for children in court, and she had zero patience for adults who put their own drama ahead of a kid's welfare. I sat across from her desk and laid it all out. The Ring footage, the spreadsheet, the wine, the visits that only happened when I was offshore. Ryan's warning at the church, all of it. She listened, didn't take notes, didn't blink. When I finished, she said, "How old is your daughter?" 4. "When was placement?" "May." "So you're, 3 months in?" 4. 3. Finalization typically runs 6 to 12 months after placement in Mecklenburg County. Judge Palmer is handling most of the DSS docket right now, and she's thorough, which means slow. Pamela leaned forward. "Here's your situation, Mr. Lawson, and I need you to hear it clearly. Until that adoption decree is entered, Lily is not legally your daughter. She's a ward of the state living in your home under DSS supervision. The man who is sleeping with your wife is the DSS employee assigned to write the reports that determine whether she stays." I said, "I understand. Do you? Because what I'm about to tell you requires a kind of discipline that most men in your position cannot sustain. Try me." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "Your job is to do nothing. Your job is to be the best father and the best husband that anyone has ever seen for the next several months. Your job is to smile at your wife, to thank Alex Pruitt for his dedication, to bring Lily to every required visit and be pleasant and cooperative and utterly, completely unremarkable. While he does what he's doing. Yes, my jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my temples. Pamela said, I know, but listen to me. If you blow this up before finalization, you lose Lily. It's that simple. Madison's affair is a marriage problem. But Alex's involvement makes it a regulatory problem. He's a licensed professional with a direct conflict of interest on an active case. He's violating the Social Work Certification and Licensure Act. But if you file an ethics complaint now, before the adoption is final, what do you think happens? DSS freezes the case. DSS freezes the case. They launch an internal review. The adoption gets delayed 6 months, a year, maybe indefinitely, and Lily, who has already lost one mother, sits in limbo while the bureaucracy chews through its own mess. So what do? We accelerate the finalization. I'll contact the DSS attorney. We get the court date moved up. We get the decree signed, and then, only then, do we file the ethics complaint, the divorce petition, and everything else. She opened a drawer, took out a yellow legal pad, and wrote 3 words on it. Finalize. Then, fight. There's one more thing, she said. If Alex has been involved with your wife during an active case and he's been filing home visit reports during that time, every report he's submitted is potentially compromised. That's not just your problem, that's every family on his caseload. The scope of it hit me then. Not as an abstraction, as a weight. Other families, other kids, other Lilies. How many cases does a social worker carry at once, I asked. In Mecklenburg County DSS, 15 to 20 typically. I sat with that for a long time. You know how in movies, the guy who's been wronged goes on some roaring rampage and everything resolves in a montage. In real life, it's the opposite. In real life, the hardest act of violence is restraint. I spent August and September 2025 being the best version of myself I'd ever managed, and it nearly killed me. I smiled at Madison over breakfast. I asked about her day. I played with Lily in the yard while Madison watched from the porch, and I pretended I didn't notice when she checked her phone. I went to the rig, and I came home, and I held the line. But I wasn't just holding, I was building. Through Ryan at the support group, I got a name, Nora Griffin. She lived in Raleigh. I drove out there on a Saturday in late August, told Madison I was going fishing at Lake Norman with a buddy. Nora lived in a small brick rancher near the North Carolina State campus. She answered the door with the guarded look of a woman who'd been expecting something bad for a long time. She was maybe 35, dark circles under her eyes, a toddler on her hip, a little boy with her jawline and someone else's eyes. I told her who I was. I told her about Alex. I told her about my wife. I told her about Lily. She stood in the doorway for about 15 seconds, not speaking, and then she stepped aside and let me in. We sat at her kitchen table. The boy played on the floor with plastic dinosaurs. Nora wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee that she never drank, and she told me. She'd adopted her son through Wake County DSS. Alex had been her social worker. He started visiting more than required, started staying longer, started making her feel like he was the only person in the system who understood what she was going through. She was single, doing it alone, and he'd show up with food or a toy for the boy or just time. Attention. The kind of careful, calibrated warmth that feels like a life raft when you're drowning. They got involved, briefly, and when she tried to end it, he didn't threaten her outright. He was smarter than that. He just mentioned, casually, how important his reports were, how a single negative observation could change things, how the system was so fragile for single mothers. She stopped fighting. She let it continue until another social worker noticed something off in Alex's visit logs. Too many entries, timestamps that didn't add up, and he got transferred. No formal complaint. No disciplinary action. Just a quiet, lateral move from Wake County to Mecklenburg County, where he was handed a fresh caseload and a clean slate, including my family. Nora was shaking by the time she finished, not dramatically, just a fine tremor in her hands that wouldn't stop, the kind that comes from holding something down for years and finally letting it move. She said, "I thought it was just me. I thought I was the one who messed up. I thought." He made me feel like I'd initiated it, like I was the lonely, desperate one who couldn't keep boundaries. And I believed him for a long time. I said, "It wasn't you." She looked at the boy on the floor. He was making a brontosaurus eat a T-Rex's head, completely absorbed. She said, "What do you need from me?" "A written statement. My attorney will walk you through it. She'll protect your identity as much as the law allows." "And then what?" "And then we make sure he doesn't do this to anyone else." She was quiet for a while. The boy knocked over a lamp made of dinosaurs and giggled. Nora picked it up without looking, the automatic reflex of a parent who's rebuilt the same thing 1,000 times. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll do it." I drove home from Raleigh with both hands on the wheel and a feeling in my chest like standing at the edge of something that was either a cliff or a runway, and I wouldn't know which until I jumped. October 2025, Mecklenburg County Courthouse, the adoption finalization hearing. Pamela had worked the timeline, pushed the DSS attorney, got the court date moved up by 5 weeks. I don't know what she said or who she called, and I didn't ask. Some things you're better off not knowing. The hearing was in a small courtroom on the 3rd floor, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, an American flag that hung a little crooked. The judge was a woman in her 60s with bifocals and the air of someone who'd seen every flavor of human foolishness and was no longer surprised by any of it. Madison and I sat at a table with our attorney, not Pamela, a different lawyer Pamela recommended for the adoption side of things, to keep things clean. Alex Pruitt sat behind us in the gallery. He was wearing a blue blazer and a tie, looking like a man who believed his own press release. He submitted his final post-placement report. All positive, glowing even. The Lawson home was stable and nurturing. The child had bonded well with both parents. The father's military discipline provided a consistent environment. Funny how my military background was a selling point in the report that went to the judge. Later, I'd find out what his internal notes said, the ones that never made it into the official file. Different story there, but that's for another day. The judge reviewed the file, asked us a few questions, looked at Lily, who was sitting in Madison's lap wearing a dress with butterflies on it. I'd let Madison pick it out because I knew this day was supposed to be hers too, and even in the middle of everything, I wasn't so far gone that I'd forgotten that. The judge said the words, granted the adoption. It was final. Lily was ours, legally, permanently, irreversibly ours. I picked Lily up on the courthouse steps and she said, "Is this forever now, Daddy?" I said, "Forever." She put her head on my shoulder. Madison stood next to us and cried. Alex stood a few feet away, smiling. A couple of DSS staffers took a photo for the file. I smiled too. I smiled so hard my face ached. That night, after Lily was in bed and Madison was in the shower, I went to the garage, opened my laptop, and sent 3 emails, one to Pamela Archer, confirming the decree was entered and authorizing her to proceed. One to the North Carolina Social Work Certification and Licensure Board, filing a formal ethics complaint against Alex Pruitt, LCSW, with 47 pages of documentation attached, ring footage, screenshots, the visit log spreadsheet, Nora Griffin's notarized statement, Alex's Wake County personnel file obtained via public records request, and a timeline that laid out every visit, every absence, every coincidence that wasn't one. One to the Director of Human Resources at Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services, requesting an immediate review of Alex Pruitt's active caseload. I closed the laptop, went inside, kissed Lily's forehead while she slept, stood in the hallway outside my daughter's room, and felt the cage fall away. It took 9 days for the bomb to go off. Alex received notice from the licensure board on a Thursday. Formal complaint filed, administrative leave, effective immediately, pending investigation. He was locked out of his DSS email by noon. He called Madison. Of course he called Madison. That night, after Lily was asleep, Madison came into the kitchen where I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a face that I'd been rehearsing for 3 months. She didn't sit down. She stood across from me with her arms crossed, her jaw set, her eyes bright, with something that wasn't tears. "You filed a complaint," she said, "not a question." "Yes." "Against Alex." "Against your social worker." "Yes." She started pacing. "You've been, what? Watching me? Going through the doorbell camera? Tracking when he comes to the house?" "I've been documenting the fact that a state-licensed social worker was visiting my home 2 to 3 times per week, exclusively during my absences, for periods of 3 to 5 hours at a time. The standard is once a month." "Don't talk to me like a lawyer, Sean. I'm talking to you like an engineer. The numbers don't lie." She stopped pacing, looked at me, and then, "This is the part I want you to understand, because this is the part that tells you everything. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She didn't try to explain. She attacked. 'You're controlling,' she said. 'You've always been controlling. You sit on that rig for 2 weeks and you come home and you act like nothing changed, like everything should be exactly where you left it. And when it's not, you catalog it. You put it in a spreadsheet. You don't ask me how I feel. You don't ask me what I need. You just measure.' Madison, he was there for me. When you were gone, when I was trying to figure out how to be a mother alone, when Lily cried for you every night and didn't want me, he was there. He listened. He saw me. He saw an opportunity. Don't you dare." "I'm not going to argue with you about what happened," I said. "I know what happened. I have 14 weeks of footage, time-stamped visit logs, a notarized statement from a woman in Raleigh you've never met, and a family law attorney who has been preparing for this conversation since August." She went very still. "You can have the house," I said. "You cannot have Lily." Her voice dropped, not soft, cold. "You can't take my daughter. She's my daughter too, and your boyfriend just lost his authority to write the reports that say otherwise." She left the room. I heard the bedroom door close. I sat at the kitchen table and drank my cold coffee and waited for the next thing, because I knew it was coming. I just didn't know what form it would take. I found out the next morning. She filed for a domestic violence protective order. In North Carolina, they call it a 50B after the statute. Here's how it works. One party goes to the courthouse, swears an affidavit alleging domestic violence, and a judge can grant an emergency ex parte order the same day. Based on one person's word, the other party doesn't get to respond until the full hearing, which has to happen within 10 days. The affidavit, Madison swore, said I had been emotionally abusive and controlling, that I had installed surveillance equipment to monitor her movements, that my military background made my controlling behavior more dangerous. The language was clinical, precise, the kind of language you'd learn from a licensed clinical social worker who knows exactly which words make a judge's pen move. A sheriff's deputy showed up at my door at 2 in the afternoon on a Friday. Madison had already taken Lily to her mother's house in Gastonia. The deputy was polite about it, professional. He'd done this 100 times. He handed me the papers and said I had to vacate the residence immediately, and that I was barred from any contact with Madison or any minor children in the home. I read the order standing on my own front porch. Then I got in my truck, drove to the Hampton Inn off I-77, checked in, and sat on the edge of the bed. I called Pamela. She filed the 50B, I said. I know. I got the notification 20 minutes ago. Are you somewhere safe? Hampton Inn. Good. Don't go back to the house. Don't call Madison. Don't call Lily. Don't text anyone about the case except me. Pamela, I can't even call my daughter. Not until the hearing, which will be within 10 days. Listen to me. She made a mistake. She filed this the day after Alex was suspended. The timeline tells its own story. We're going to be fine. Fine is not the word I'd use. Mr. Lawson, you have done everything right. You have documentation that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. We will get through this, but these next 10 days, I need you to be the man you've been for the last 3 months. Can you do that? I said I could. I hung up. I sat in that hotel room and stared at the wall and tried not to think about Lily waking up in a strange bed, wondering where I was. Derek drove up from Morehead City that night. 4 hours, no notice. He walked in with a bag from Bojangles and 2 bottles of sweet tea and sat down in the chair by the window and said, "All right, talk." I talked. For the first time in months, I talked. Not like a case. Not like an engineer laying out data points. Like a man whose chest was full of broken glass and needed to let some of it out before it cut him open. Derek listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell me it would be okay. When I was done, he said, "You know what you remind me of." What? That night on the rig when the blowout preventer failed. Remember, everybody's running around losing their heads, and you just walked over to the control panel, calm as Sunday morning, and started working the problem. You didn't fix it by panicking. You fixed it by being the guy who doesn't panic. This isn't a blowout preventer. No, it's harder. But you're the same guy. I didn't sleep much that week. 3 nights, then 4, then 7. I ate when Derek told me to eat. I sat in that room and I did not call my daughter, and I want you to know that it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than anything on the rig. Harder than anything in the Army. Harder than lying awake while another man's car sat in my driveway, because at least then I was holding the cards. In that hotel room, I was holding nothing. The hearing was on a Wednesday, courtroom 3C, Mecklenburg County District Court. Same building where I'd finalized Lily's adoption 3 weeks earlier. Different floor, different feeling. Madison testified first. She was composed. She'd been prepared. I could hear the coaching in every sentence. She said I had installed cameras to monitor and control her, that I'd obsessively tracked her daily movements, that my military training made me hyper-vigilant in a way that felt threatening. She used words like coercive control and emotional intimidation and pattern of surveillance. Every phrase was a bullet cast from someone else's mold. The judge, different judge, not the one from the adoption, listened without expression. I sat next to Pamela and kept my hands flat on the table and my face still. Then it was our turn. Pamela called Derek first. He walked to the stand in khakis and a pressed shirt, looking like exactly what he was, a safety supervisor on an offshore rig, a man whose job was staying calm when everything was on fire. "Mr. Holt, how long have you worked with Mr. Lawson?" 4 years. "In your observation, is Mr. Lawson a volatile or aggressive individual?" Derek almost smiled. "Ma'am, Sean Lawson is the calmest human being I have ever met. I've seen him handle a wellhead malfunction at 2 in the morning without raising his voice. He is the person on that rig that every man wants next to him when things go wrong, because he doesn't go wrong." Pamela introduced 2 sworn affidavits from other rig colleagues. Same theme, same picture. A man who built things, a man who solved problems, a man who talked about his daughter constantly and showed her drawings to anyone who would look. Then Pamela called her real witness. Nora Griffin appeared on a screen via remote testimony from her attorney's office in Raleigh. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she held her hands, but her voice was steady. She told her story, the same one she'd told me at her kitchen table, but this time under oath with a court reporter typing every word. Alex Pruitt, the excessive visits, the relationship, the implicit threats when she tried to leave, the quiet transfer that solved nothing. I watched the judge's face change. Not dramatically. Judges don't do dramatic, but something shifted behind her eyes, a recalculation, a reassessment of who in this room was the threat and who was the target. Pamela put the ring footage on the courtroom monitor. Not all of it, just the highlights. Alex arriving at 7:45 p.m. with a bottle of wine, Alex leaving at 11:50 p.m. The spreadsheet, visit dates, durations, patterns, all during Sean's offshore rotations, none during his home weeks. She presented Alex's personnel records from Wake County, obtained through a public records request, the transfer. The reason? Concerns regarding client boundaries. No formal discipline, no complaint filed, just a quiet handoff. She presented the licensure board complaint receipt, time-stamped, filed through proper channels. No intimidation, no threats, no surveillance of a state employee, just a citizen raising a concern about professional misconduct through the mechanisms the state itself had created. Pamela turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, the respondent filed this protective order one day after Mr. Pruitt was placed on administrative leave, in direct response to a legitimate regulatory complaint, not in response to any act of domestic violence. The evidence before this court shows not a pattern of abuse by my client, but a pattern of misconduct by a state employee who compromised his professional obligations and is now being held accountable for it. The petitioner's 50B filing is an attempt to weaponize a protective order as a tactical measure in an anticipated custody dispute. The judge denied the permanent order. She said on the record that the evidence suggested the petition had been filed in response to legitimate regulatory complaints, not in response to domestic violence. Madison's attorney asked for a recess. Madison was in the hallway, leaning against the wall. I walked past her on my way out. We didn't speak. I got in my truck, called the preschool, told them I'd be picking Lily up at 3. Then I sat in the parking deck for about 10 minutes and let my hands shake because they'd earned it. After that, things moved fast, the way a river moves fast after the dam cracks. Not all at once, but with a force you can't push back against. The licensure board didn't move fast. They never do. These investigations take 6 months, sometimes a year or more. But what they did do immediately was extend Alex's administrative suspension while the case was under review. He couldn't practice, couldn't access case files, couldn't set foot in a DSS office. And crucially, the board sent formal notice to Mecklenburg County DSS that a complaint involving one of their employees was under active investigation and that the agency should conduct its own internal review. DSS opened that review in November, and once they started pulling threads, other threads came loose. 2 more families from Alex's caseload came forward with concerns, not affairs as far as I know, but boundary issues, visits that felt too personal, questions that weren't about the child, the kind of behavior that people tolerate because the person doing it holds the pen that writes the report on their family. Here's the part that surprised me, though Pamela said it shouldn't have. When the board investigator interviewed Alex as part of the preliminary fact-finding, he turned on Madison, tried to minimize what he'd done by pushing the blame sideways, told the investigator that Madison had pursued him, that she was aggressive in initiating the relationship. that he'd made a poor choice, but that the dynamic was driven by her loneliness and neediness, not his predatory behavior. He threw her under the bus with both hands in a sworn statement that became part of the investigative record. When Pamela told me that, I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, something closer to pity, because Madison had trusted this man, had believed whatever she'd told herself, that he cared about her, that he saw her the way she said he did. And the moment his career was on the line, he made her the villain of his story without a moment's hesitation. That's who he was. That's who he'd always been. I filed for divorce in December. Pamela handled it. In North Carolina, you have to be separated for a year before the divorce is finalized, so the filing started the clock. But the custody piece moved on a different track. Pamela filed an emergency motion for temporary custody of Lily, and she built it on 3 pillars: the denied DVPO, which suggested Madison had filed a false claim, the active licensure board investigation, and Alex's administrative suspension, documenting that Madison's affair partner had direct influence over Lily's case throughout the entire placement period, and Alex's own preliminary statement to the board investigator in which he blamed Madison for the relationship, a sworn statement that Pamela subpoenaed from the record. The court awarded me primary temporary custody. Madison got supervised visitation every other weekend. The judge was careful to note that the affair, in itself, wasn't the basis for the decision. North Carolina is a no-fault state. You don't lose your kids for cheating. But the judge used a phrase that Pamela later told me she'd been building toward for months: the pattern of deception during a period of profound vulnerability for the child, and the exploitation of a regulatory process designed to protect that child. That was the ground. That was the foundation, not the affair, the betrayal of trust inside a system that existed to keep a child safe. Madison stood in the courtroom and looked at me the way a person looks at someone they don't recognize anymore. I looked back. I didn't feel what I thought I'd feel, not triumph, not vindication, just a low, heavy exhaustion, like the end of a shift that went 3 hours too long. January 2026. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not empty, Lily was there, and a 4-year-old fills a house with more noise than you'd think a person that size could produce. But the other kind of quiet. The kind where a second adult's presence is missing, and you feel it in the spaces: the other side of the bed, the second coffee mug, the voice down the hallway. Madison moved to an apartment in South End. She didn't fight the custody arrangement. I think the fight went out of her when Alex's statement hit the record. Hard to keep swinging when the person you sacrificed everything for tells the world it was all your idea. I heard Alex left Charlotte. Somebody in the support group said he'd gone to Florida. With his license suspended pending investigation and his name in the DSS internal review, there was nothing left for him here. I didn't track him. I didn't care where he went. He was Nora's ghost, and the board's problem, and the system's scar. He wasn't mine anymore. I made the one decision that mattered. I switched from offshore rotations to a shore-based pipeline inspection job. Derek helped me get it. It paid less, a lot less. No more 2 weeks on, 2 off money, no more per diem, no more tax-free overtime. But I was home every night, and that's a currency you can't put in a spreadsheet. Lily asked where Mommy went. I'd been bracing for it, had rehearsed answers in my head the way I rehearse weld sequences before a job. I said, Mommy lives in a different house now, but she still loves you. Lily said, but why? I said, sometimes grown-ups need to live apart. It's not about you. It was never about you. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, can I bring my butterflies when I visit her? You can bring whatever you want, she nodded, went back to coloring. Kids process things in ways that adults can't. They bend where we break. I didn't badmouth Madison. I want to be clear about that. Not because I'd forgiven her. I hadn't, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise, but because Lily was 4 years old, and she needed both of us to be solid ground, and I would eat my own tongue before I made my daughter feel like she had to choose sides. February, a Tuesday. I was at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, going through bills and trying to figure out how to make a shore-based salary cover a mortgage and preschool, when I noticed a letter in the stack of mail I'd tossed on the counter that morning. No return address, plain white envelope. My name in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it. Sean, I want you to know that after I testified in your case, I did something I should have done 3 years ago. I filed my own formal complaint against Alex Pruitt with the licensure board, separate from yours, covering what he did to me in Wake County. The board is now handling both complaints together, and the scope of their investigation has expanded. 2 other women from his caseload have come forward since. His attorney tried to negotiate a voluntary surrender of his license last month. The board rejected it. They want the full hearing on the record, so it follows him. I spent a long time believing that what happened to me was my fault, that I was weak or lonely, or that I should have known better. It took watching you fight for your daughter to understand that I wasn't weak. I was targeted, and the system that should have protected me chose to protect itself instead. You didn't just save your family, you made it so he can't do this to anyone else. I wish someone had done what you did when it happened to me. Thank you. Nora, I put the letter in my desk drawer. I sat there for a while. Then I went to bed because I had to pick up Lily from preschool in the morning, and she'd been talking about a tissue paper butterfly she was making, and I wanted to be awake enough to tell her it was the most beautiful butterfly I'd ever seen.